Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Vivian Cristino, Capacity Building Specialist at Housing Action Illinois. This presentation is being recorded and will be available later in our website, and we will send you the link with the PowerPoint presentation. Meanwhile, just download the handouts that we put to you. It's in the control panel. You can just go all the way down and get those handouts. This webinar will be discussing how bankruptcies can be used to save homes from foreclosure, property tax sales, and other debt-related issues. We will be review a few basics about consumer bankruptcy, discuss reasons for homeowners to consider filing bankruptcy, and outline the advantage and disadvantage of filing bankruptcy for a homeowner. Also, please submit your test questions and comments using the questions panel. So our panelists will be answer some of them during the webinar. And talking about panelists, our panelist today is Susana Heredia, a staff attorney, Consumer Practice Group at LAF. LAF for more than 50 years has provided free legal services in non-criminal matters to people living in poverty in metropolitan Chicago. So Susana Heredia has been an attorney with LAF's Consumer Practice Group since summer 2017, and before that, she was a law clerk with the U.S. Bankruptcy Court here in Chicago for almost 3 years. Susana is graduate from Law School, University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana in the fall of 2014. During law school, was an intern with the United States Trustee, Department of Justice branch that oversees bankruptcies, and with Land of Lincoln Legal Assistance Foundation. So I want to thank Susana Heredia and LAF for the support and assistance in developing this presentation. Susana?
Hi. Okay, so let's get started. The goals of this training are to, as Vivian was saying, provide an overview of how bankruptcy can be used to preserve home ownership and to give a few basics about bankruptcy law. Let's start with the basic purposes of bankruptcy are twofold. To give a fresh start to the honest but unfortunate debtor who cannot afford to pay his debts, and to promote fairness among creditors. This means that similarly situated creditors will be treated equally. So, for example, credit card creditors will be paid a percentage, the same percentage of their debts. And this is in contrast to how it operates in state court, where the first person that makes it to court will generally collect the full amount or as much as they can, and then the rest will collect nothing. Chapter 13 is, so there are two types of consumer bankruptcy, Chapter 13 and Chapter 7. Chapter 13 is a reorganization. It allows the debtor to keep their property and can be used to cure defaults on secured debt, including reversing a repossession of a vehicle or halting a foreclosure. The debtor proposes a plan to repay creditors, and the bankruptcy court will review it and approve it if it meets, if it can work, and if it meets all the requirements of bankruptcy law. Payments are made to the Chapter 13 trustee, who will pay them according to the plan. Chapter 7, on the other hand, is a liquidation. If the debtor has non-exempt assets or any assets of value, those will be turned over to the trustee, liquidated, and creditors will be paid out of that. If the debtor has no assets, as it's common, then the debtor will just get a discharge of all the debts. Now, I'm using concepts like discharge and exemptions. We'll go over those a little bit later. In a Chapter 7, however, the debtor cannot cure defaults on secured debt, like a home or a car, and they cannot get their collateral back unless the secured creditor agrees. So in short, a Chapter 7 will not help a homeowner that is behind on his or her mortgage, but it can be helpful for homeowners that do not have much equity in their home and have a lot of unsecured debt, like credit cards or utilities. For homeowners, Chapter 13 can be very useful to stop a foreclosure, to catch up with delinquent payments to prevent a foreclosure, or a property tax sale. And then it can also be extremely useful to eliminate, wipe out undersecured junior liens and also sometimes judgment liens. For this to work, they have to be pretty much underwater. So they owe more. The first mortgage pretty much covers the value of the property. But in that case, sometimes the second mortgage can be wiped out. In a mortgage foreclosure, a Chapter 13 must be filed before the home is sold at a foreclosure sale. This is the law in the Seventh Circuit, which covers Illinois and Wisconsin. And this is even though the bank still, even though after the foreclosure sale, the foreclosure is not over. They have to go get the sale confirmed and then get an order of possession. But the Seventh Circuit has said that the foreclosure sale is the limit. That's when the debtor has to file foreclosure if they want to save the house. For property tax sales, the deadline is probably redemption, when the redemption expires. That's the safe answer. It's still kind of, there's one court in Chicago that has hinted that a debtor can file until the tax deed has issued, but that's really just not safe. So we at LAF would file before redemption expires. Now, some basic bankruptcy concepts. The main one is the discharge. This one effectuates the so-called fresh start mentioned as a primary purpose of bankruptcy. A discharge is essentially a court order that prohibits creditors from collecting their debts. Certain types of debts, however, are exempted from a discharge, or as we call it, are non-dischargeable. The main ones are student loans, debts for child support and alimony, criminal fines and restitution orders, debts for personal injury due to driving under the influence, and certain taxes owed to the IRS. Parking tickets are non-dischargeable in Chapter 7. They can be discharged only in Chapter 13. Generally, bankruptcies only include debts that the debtor had as of the day the bankruptcy is filed. So, for instance, if the debtor accumulates parking tickets after the bankruptcy is filed, those parking tickets will not be included in the bankruptcy and they will not be discharged. In a Chapter 13, the debtor can also repay certain non-dischargeable debts like child support and alimony. They're actually required to pay them in full, as well as taxes. So I guess Chapter 13 can also be helpful for that if someone is really far behind on those debts that wouldn't be discharged in bankruptcy anyways. So the two types of bankruptcy law divides debts into two. There's secured debt and unsecured debt. Secured debt is debt that is guaranteed by an asset. This includes car loans and mortgages, but can also include business loan that is secured by revenue or like a revenue stream or some other asset. If a debtor falls behind, the creditor can liquidate the collateral. Unsecured debt is debt that is not guaranteed or backed by any collateral. If you default on an unsecured debt, there is nothing that the creditor can take back for non-payment of the loan. There are certain limits for Chapter 13 bankruptcies, debt limits. These really only apply for people that have secured debt of, you should really only think about it when they owe more than $1 million. like $1 million mortgage, they may be ineligible for Chapter 13, or if they have unsecured debt of more than almost $400,000. And these numbers are adjusted every 3 years. So if they are ineligible for Chapter 13, they would be pushed into Chapter 11. Chapter 11 is a lot like Chapter 13, but it's more expensive because it just deals with generally more money, and there's involvement by the United States trustee branch of the U.S. Department of Justice that monitors bankruptcy law.
Susana, I have a
Yes.
question here. If you can please go back to the discharge slide.
Yes, absolutely.
And it was like they wanted to review it again, please. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, so the idea with the discharge is that certain types of debts like child support and people that maybe injure somebody while they're driving under the influence, those debts are deemed, they're deemed special, and that's why they are non-dischargeable. Student loans is kind of arbitrary. They were just made non-dischargeable by Congress. I think in 2005. Before that, they could be discharged before or after 5 years. So let me go back to, whoops.
Yeah, meanwhile, I just want to remind you, everybody, that Vivian, I will send you the link after we upload the PowerPoint in this recording webinar to our website. So I will send it to you. It was very heavy to put it in the handouts, but you can just download the handouts that we put here. You can find it in the control panel at the end. Go below and just download those ones before. I will send you the other ones later, okay? Thank you. Thank you, Susana.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of information in the slides, and yeah, you guys can definitely go back to them. And my email will be at the end of the slides. If you have any question at all, you're free to contact me directly. So let's go over Chapter 13 again. In a Chapter 13, the debtor proposes a plan that must be between 3 and 5 years long. That is 36 months to 60 months. Any mortgage arrears, that includes principal, interest, taxes, attorney's fees, etc., is going to be paid over time, over the life of the plan. As long as the plan is approved and the debtor makes the payments, the debtor can save her home. The plan will pay the debtor's what we call, or the Bankruptcy Code calls, disposable income to the trustee. This means that the debtor must be able to meet all their monthly expenses, including the current mortgage payment, and have something left at the end of the month to pay the trustee. The amount that is left, and that's what we call the disposable income, must be enough to pay off the arrears if the debtor wants to cure the default. So that's for the default. And for unsecured debt, like credit cards, in a Chapter 13, the debtor must pay unsecured creditors at least as much as they would receive in a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, that is, in a liquidation. So if the debtor has valuable assets, he may need to pay his unsecured creditors the value of those assets if he wants to retain them in a Chapter 13. Assets can include, sorry about that. Assets can include real and personal property, and they can also include a right to property, such as a lawsuit or an inheritance. It really includes any type of property, including like valuable, baseball cards. Like anything needs to be reported when you file a bankruptcy, there's like a schedule of personal property, and you need to disclose everything, even your dog. And if you have a very expensive dog, in theory, you may need to, if you're in a 13, you may need to pay the value of that expensive dog. Or in the Chapter 7, in theory, if your dog is very valuable, the trustee could take it and sell it and pay your creditors. That's not very common. Generally, someone that has very valuable assets we would advise them not to file bankruptcy. So exemptions are provided by state and federal law. Exempt money or property is property that cannot be taken for payment of a debt. This means that a debtor can be sued and a judgment entered against them, but if their property or their money is exempt, that money or property cannot be taken from them to pay the judgment. Illinois law provides for a series of exemptions. There's the $15,000 homestead exemption for residential property. There's a $4,000 so-called wild card exemption. It's called a wild card because it can be applied to any personal property, including a car or jewelry, anything that the debtor wants to keep. And these exemptions can be used in Chapter 7 and in Chapter 13. There's a $2,400 exemption for vehicles and a $15,000 exemption for personal injury cases. That means if you are injured and you get an award in a case, an award for money for your injuries, you can exempt up to $15,000. Anything above that would, in theory, if you file bankruptcy, would have to be turned over to the trustee to pay your creditors. But exemptions are basically what the law allows you to keep, even when you're, when you owe creditors and when they sue you and try to take everything you own. So in a Chapter 7, those assets would not need to be turned over to the trustee. And in a Chapter 13, you would not need to pay unsecured creditors for those assets. So the way these exemptions generally operate is that you have a home, and say the home is $100,000. Say it's worth $100,000, and you owe $85,000 on your mortgage. You would stack the homestead exemption, meaning that your home is absolutely protected, and you would not have to pay. But if your home was worth $150,000 and you owed $80,000 or $85,000, then with the homestead exemption, there would still be equity of about $50,000. So you would either have to, if you file Chapter 13, you have to propose to pay $50,000 approximately. It can be a little bit less when you consider cost of sale and everything. So you would have to pay at least that much. Social Security benefits and pension income are also exempt. Social Security is exempt under federal law, and pension benefits are exempt under Illinois law, and also retirement accounts are also exempt.
Susana, we have a question here. What about VA disability? That one will be considered an exemption like the Social Security?
Yes, I think so. If it is Social Security disability income, it would fall within the Social Security benefits exemption. If it's you'd have to go back to the statute itself, but I think even if it's disability, it depends on the source, but most types of disability will generally be exempt. Upon filing of the bankruptcy case, the automatic stay comes into effect. The automatic stay is an order that prohibits collection of any pre-bankruptcy debt and prohibits disposition of any property that the debtor had as of the date of the bankruptcy. So if a bankruptcy is filed while a foreclosure case is pending, that foreclosure case is stayed or put on hold. If a car lender has repossessed a vehicle, they must return that vehicle to the debtor and they cannot sell it. Any collection activity, including calls from creditors and demands for payment, must cease automatically. If a debtor has, however, if the debtor has had other bankruptcies in the last year, they should the attorney should already know that because they need to be reported when you file the bankruptcy. But also there's a kind of an additional step that needs to be taken. You need to file a motion requesting that the stay be extended. The stay, if you have one bankruptcy within the last year, the stay will only be in effect for 30 days. And if you've had more than 2 or more bankruptcies within the last year, this is for serial filers, no stay will come into effect, and you need to file a motion requesting that the stay be imposed. So this is kind of the most between the discharge and the automatic stay. Those are the main concepts in bankruptcy and that provide protection to the debtor, the so-called fresh start. All collection activity must cease. So even though the stay generally comes into effect automatically, a creditor, such as a bank in a foreclosure case, can seek relief from the automatic stay. They file a motion asking the court to exempt them from the stay. The mortgage lender generally has the right to seek relief from the stay if the debtor falls behind on mortgage payments after filing the bankruptcy, or if they cannot afford to make the necessary payments to cure the default. Say they propose a budget that just would not cure the default. And also, if they maybe do not have homeowners insurance and are not paying their property taxes, this is assuming their loan is not escrowed. So this is kind of a simple example of how payment of mortgage arrears would work in a Chapter 13 bankruptcy. Say the homeowner owes $24,000 in mortgage arrears, and this includes, and when you consider arrears in bankruptcy, you need to include the principal, interest, any escrow advances, attorney's fees if the bankruptcy has been filed, not the bankruptcy, the foreclosure has been filed, and costs. And assume that they have monthly income of $4,100, and that their mortgage payment, their regular mortgage payment, is $1,500. They would be required, for this bankruptcy to work, they would be required to pay the $24,000 back in 60 months or less. So this would be a minimum monthly plan payment of $400. So they have to propose a budget that pays all of their monthly expenses, including that $1,500 mortgage payment, and they still have $400 left over each month to pay to the trustee, and that would go towards the mortgage arrears. So this is sort of how it could look. Their income, and when we think of their monthly expenses, it really includes anything you can conceive. You have to estimate their utilities, there's their food, health, medical expenses, home maintenance, which can be averaged, transportation, clothing, entertainment, car payment, auto insurance, any child care expenses. So everything has to be included, and the schedules of income and expenses are very detailed. But their income has to provide for all those expenses and then leave some money for the plan payment. So this is kind of how it would look. They would, if their expenses, are at least $3,700, then they would have $400 that they can pay to the trustee for 60 months and thereby pay off the mortgage arrears of $24,000. there are, I guess, powerful advantages to filing for bankruptcy, especially for someone that has an interruption of income. For example, when the state didn't pass a budget, there were many, many state employees that came to bankruptcy court and filed Chapter 13 bankruptcies because they had an interruption of income. But then when they were paid again, they actually had the ability to pay their mortgage, but they could not catch up with $8,000 or however much they owed at that time. So the advantages of Chapter 13 are that when the client has enough income to cure a default, the Chapter 13 bankruptcy can prevent a foreclosure and the loss of a home due to delinquent property taxes. Bankruptcy can also stop a garnishment. It can reinstate a driver's license that had been suspended for parking tickets, and can also discharge credit card debt and other unsecured debt. For example, one of my clients, she was current on her mortgage. Her problem was that she had this old debt to like a payday lender that had sued her, and they were about to start garnishing her because her income was above the garnishment level. They were going to be able to take a big chunk of her paycheck, and if they did that, she would not be able to pay her mortgage. So in a situation like that, and when she didn't really have many assets besides her house, and she owed as much as her house was worth, we filed a Chapter 7 bankruptcy in that case. In other cases, when they have equity, then a Chapter 13 may be more useful to, when the client is like behind on their mortgage, then you have to do a Chapter 13 to pay off the arrears or the property taxes. There are, of course, disadvantages to filing for bankruptcy. The main disadvantage is that a bankruptcy stays on your credit report for 10 years. So going forward, getting credit may be harder or more expensive. So it'll stay there, becomes a problem.
I have a question here. It says, how long is gonna take for a person to file bankruptcy to get credit to buy a home?
So that can depend. I would say, let's see if I can. I had a little. Yeah, here it is. We have a list that kind of estimates. I mean, so it really depends, because most people that are filing bankruptcy are already behind on their bills, so they've already, their credit report is already, or their credit score has already suffered. So, at that point, filing a bankruptcy will maybe lower your credit score a little bit more, but it's already bad. A Chapter 7 generally, lowers your credit a lot more than a Chapter 13, as I understand it. So here we have the impact of on your credit score. So it depends on how high your credit score is. Here, if your credit score is about 680, it will take about 5 years for you to recover. So it's not insignificant. It may be that if someone co-signs with you, or if you do, different things like get a new, a small credit card and start building credit again, then it may be, your credit score will get better in less than 5 years, but it definitely takes time. On the other hand, we'll go into this. This is the next slide. there are certain waiting periods. So if you get a Chapter 7 discharge, you cannot file Chapter 7 again for 8 years. So a lot of the time, people that file Chapter 7 get lots of credit card offers because the lenders know that they cannot file bankruptcy again for 8 years. But in general, to answer your question, I think it takes at least 5 years. Sometimes if your credit score is even higher, and this is for your credit score to return to where it was before the bankruptcy, it takes about 5 years. If your credit score is about 680, which is the national average, if your credit score is much higher, like 720, it can take 7 to 10 years to recover. And to recover from, for example, a foreclosure, it is estimated that it would take about 3 years. So, I mean, it is the equivalent of, it's close to a foreclosure, but it definitely takes a few. If the person wants to buy a home in the next 3 years, maybe bankruptcy would not be advisable unless they already have really bad, credit because they're behind on a million credit cards. In that case, they may, they have nothing to lose by filing bankruptcy. Or they can, if they can have, if they have somebody that can co-sign with them, then maybe that could be an option too. But it definitely hurts your credit. They say that Chapter 13 is generally a little bit better than Chapter 7, but they both have an impact on your credit. So the waiting. Yeah, go ahead.
No, comments are, yes, it depends on the creditor as well. That's what they're saying. So it depends on the bankruptcy, and it depends on what is the creditor also.
Absolutely.
I have a couple questions here. What happens if debts other than mortgage arrears cannot be paid off entirely after 5 years?
So the plan has to propose complete, payment in full of the arrears. If you propose a plan that pays less than the mortgage arrears, the mortgage company will basically come into court. They will object to the plan, and they will also file a motion to lift the stay to basically continue with their foreclosure. Because, the argument is they're not even going to pay me in full. So why should I wait 5 years? Let me go back to state court and continue with my foreclosure. So the mortgage arrears have to be paid in full. And often when people call us, to evaluate a bankruptcy, we have to advise them, they're going to have to essentially let the house go because they just don't have the income to cure the arrears. So bankruptcy Chapter 13 is very powerful, but it also requires you to have enough money to pay the arrears in full. Did you have another question?
Yes, you say, why would a person file a Chapter 7 and then file a Chapter 13?
Imagine that, say you are a homeowner and you owe, your mortgage is, you owe as much as your house is worth. And then somebody, say you get in a car accident and you're not drunk, it's just but it was your fault. So a judgment is entered against you for, I don't know, let's say $30,000. At that point, that person is going to either, try to garnish your wages to collect those $30,000, or they are going to put a lien on your home, or they can do both in theory. That type of debt, $30,000 for, a car accident, would be a general unsecured debt. Assuming that you're current on your mortgage payments, you don't really need a Chapter 13 because you don't need to cure any default. Your only problem at that point is this $30,000 um, judgment against you, and then maybe some credit card debt. So at that point, we would advise that you file a Chapter 7. The Chapter 7 is not going to do anything to the mortgage. It's just you have to continue making your mortgage payments, and assume that you get your discharge, and a year later you fall behind on your mortgage. You either lose your job, and you have an interruption of income, or something happens that makes you fall behind on your mortgage. At that point, if you can't catch up without a bankruptcy, then a Chapter 13 would be what you would do. So that's generally the scenario. Chapter 13s are useful to catch up with your mortgage, or also to catch up with your, say you fall behind on your car payments and you want to catch up with that. You can also file a Chapter 13 for that. But Chapter 7 is very useful to discharge general unsecured debt. Even a credit card judgment. So in the example that I mentioned of my client that was going to be garnished, and she was current on her mortgage, owed as much as her house was worth. So there was no equity, no risk that the trustee would come in and take her home and sell it to repay the creditors. She filed a Chapter 7. Now she is she's in great shape. She doesn't have to pay credit card debt. She had a lot of credit card debt too. If she has an interruption of income or falls behind on her mortgage and she calls me back, we would be evaluating a Chapter 13. And I should mention that these deadlines, especially, so to get a Chapter 7 discharge, you just simply cannot get a discharge if you filed within the last 8 years or 4 years from Chapter 13 to Chapter 7. So you just simply would not file a Chapter 7. It would be pointless. But a Chapter 13 can actually be filed even if you don't get a discharge. And so going back to the example of either my client or the person with the $30,000 judgment, if they fall behind on their mortgage the next year, they can still file a Chapter 13. Even though they may not be eligible for a discharge, it wouldn't matter because hopefully they wouldn't have too much unsecured debt in that year. They may have a few credit card, if they fall behind on their mortgage, then they may have other type of debt too. Then they would just have to repay it in full, the arrears and the debt that they have accrued. But if it's after 6 years, then they can get a discharge for unsecured debt and they can catch up on their mortgage. But mortgage arrears always have to be paid in full. They cannot be discharged. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, I have one more. How can remove a bankruptcy record of the credit report agencies after 10 years if they don't do it?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, it generally comes off. I would assume, I guess I don't know the answer to that, but based on my experience with misreporting by the credit bureaus, I would assume that you just have to kind of object to it and file, contact the credit reporting agencies and ask for that to be removed. So it is my understanding that it comes off automatically after 10 years, but I don't know if there's a rule about that or if there's I'm not sure. But I assume you can, if there's a rule, you would contact the credit reporting bureaus and ask for that to be removed. And even so, if the creditor, if someone's looking at your credit report and there's a bankruptcy 10 years ago or 9 years ago, it won't really hurt you as much as a recent bankruptcy. Any other questions?
No, we don't have any questions at the moment, no more. But remember, everybody on the call, this is information, especially housing counselors. You cannot advise any of your clients to file in bankruptcy. So you just need to refer to LAF or another legal aid agency. In the way the attorneys specialized in bankruptcy can help you. They can help the client to take the decision. Okay, this is information. So no, we don't have any other questions at the moment, Susanna. So we can continue. Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah. And I mean, this information is also very useful for housing counselors to maybe at least know how quickly they need to move in making a referral. If the bankruptcy has just, or not, the foreclosure has just been filed, then we have time. But if they come to you guys after they've been defaulted and maybe there's just like a week before judgment is entered, or before the house is sold, then you would know that you need to move pretty quickly. If this client has income and they don't owe, and they owe arrears that they could maybe pay off, even if there's a possibility that they can pay it off, then just make a quick referral. If it's someone that just doesn't have any money, you can also make a referral, and we will explain to this client why a Chapter 13 would not work. I think it's great to refer people to legal aid organizations because we give this advice for free. Bankruptcy is an area of the law where I've found there's a lot of abuse and kind of predatory services offered, so an attorney will, there are lots of attorneys that will file the bankruptcy, even if it's just to delay the foreclosure, even when they know that it's not going to go anywhere. And that's upsetting to me because in bankruptcy in Chapter 13, attorneys get paid first. So any money that you pay will go to the attorneys. So what I like about my job is, even if we turn a lot of people down, is that we can at least advise them about that. And sometimes attorneys that just charge for this type of advice will not give it to people or take the time to explain it to them. Okay, so something important to remember for people that file bankruptcy is that they are required to take a credit counseling course both before they file for bankruptcy and after they file bankruptcy. The first one is called a credit counseling course, the pre-bankruptcy one. The second one is called a financial management course. And you have to take it from with an authorized credit counseling agency. There are several, and they charge between $10 and $40, $50. They offer these courses over the phone, online, and sometimes in person. I've found that doing the course online is usually cheaper than doing it in person or over the phone. And sometimes if the client doesn't have income or has exempt income, like maybe Social Security, or their income is relatively low, then sometimes these credit counseling agencies will waive the fee. And this would generally be for a Chapter 7. And we filed Chapter 7s for people with low income that even don't, that are not homeowners, or, for example, when they are at risk of their utilities being shut off. They have a big debt to ComEd. I am anticipating lots of calls after this season because it's been so cold. So people just can't repay their utilities. And so we file a Chapter 7 sometimes to prevent the shutoff. If people don't, if they don't take the pre-bankruptcy course, then the bankruptcy will be dismissed. And there's no discretion here for the judge. They have to dismiss it if they don't take the pre-bankruptcy course. And this is a problem for people that represent themselves. They forget to do this. And then the second course, if they don't take it, then they just won't receive a discharge. The case will be closed without a discharge. These are the sources of law in bankruptcy. There's the United States Code, Title 11. Bankruptcy law is federal law. There are the federal rules of bankruptcy procedure, and then each judge and each court has standing orders. Those also apply. And there's the website is very useful. It generally has access to everything, to the code, to the rules, standing orders. This is Northern District of Illinois, Eastern Division. This covers Cook County. Illinois, I think, has maybe 4 districts, at least 3. So, but if you Google bankruptcy court Chicago, this one will pop up. And if you're in a different town, they'll have a different website, but they'll have this kind of similar information. So we always consider bankruptcy a last resort. It's very powerful, but it's also not easy, and it has an effect on people's credit that is, it stays with you for several years. So if that's when we normally refer people to you, to housing counselors, to see if people can get a loan modification, if they can apply for hardest hit. Other maybe less feasible alternatives to filing bankruptcy are to pay off the debts. If you, I don't know, have the money or have someone that can give you the money, then you can just pay off and reinstate or redeem the mortgage, but or pay off the property taxes. So I think we usually just hope for a loan modification, and when that fails, then we do a bankruptcy. But bankruptcy is always the last resort. All right, so that's all I got. Are there any other questions?
No, we don't have more questions at the moment. Let's wait a minute and see if our attendees are going to write something here. Meanwhile, I'm just going to let you know again that you are going to have access to the slides, this recording actually, with all the explanation that Susana gave us today. I will send you the link after I upload the PowerPoint and recording to our website. So I will send you the link. This is the information for Susana if you wanted to contact her directly, but and also you have the handout with the general information about LAF and what they do, and also what are the help desk and clinics so you can just refer your clients if you are in Cook County, right, Susana?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And we do we serve people that are I guess below certain income, but for homeowners, I think if they're suburban seniors, there is no income cap, and the income cap is also significantly higher for homeowners. So I think it's always worth the shot, calling LAF, and if the intake specialist says no, you're over income, then they might refer you elsewhere. But if you're over income, you maybe you can afford an attorney. But yeah, I would always call LAF and see if you can at least talk to an attorney that can give you advice, even if that advice is don't file for bankruptcy or you cannot afford it. So that's very helpful, and I'm very thankful for what you guys do. I often refer my clients to a housing counselor when I think they can possibly qualify for a loan modification, or just to help them sort things out with a default.
Yeah, this is like a win-win. So, yeah, we don't have any other questions here. We just finished a little bit earlier.
Great.
So, I thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Susanna. Thank you, LAF. And you guys, keep warm. If you are here around Chicago, it's going to be very, 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 very
Yes,
cold.
yes.
So, if you can't leave the office early today, so just just do it if you can, and keep warm. And we see you soon again. Okay.
Great.
Have a
Great.
wonderful afternoon, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Vivian.
Okay. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.